It's been 4 days now since the U.S. bombed the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, and the calls for an independent investigation have only grown louder and more insistent in that time. Now, the president is trying to ward off these sorts of calls. The military is currently conducting the early phases of this sort of investigation, but both Doctors Without Borders and some in the United Nations Human Rights section want it to be independent, not conducted under the jurisdiction of the United States. And so the president did call both the government of Afghanistan to apologize, and he also called Joanne Liu, the international president of Doctors Without Borders, to apologize and express his condolences for the MSF staff and patients who were killed and injured, according to his press secretary, Josh Earnest. He also assured Dr. Liu that the Department of Defense investigation currently underway would provide a transparent, thorough, and objective account of the facts and circumstances of the incident, and that if necessary, the president would implement changes that would make tragedies like this one less likely to occur in the future. But as of right now, presidential call notwithstanding, MSF is not buying it. Joanne Liu said that this was not just an attack on our hospital, it was an attack on the Geneva Conventions. This cannot be tolerated. And we've been following the sort of evolution of the military's explanation of what happened. Was it an accident, or did the Afghanis tell us to bomb there? And then it's an accident again, and then maybe it was an accident and they told us to bomb there. And it goes back and forth. And we have some new information about Pentagon guidelines for when you can attack a site like the hospital and whether or not they actually gave the warnings that they were supposed to. But first, of course, I'll give you a chance to comment.
Okay, so Dr. Liu, I like her attitude because she's like, yeah, I'm not buying it. So if we allow this to happen, there are no bounds in war then. So we can't allow it to stand. And the U.S. says, no, don't worry about it. We're going to investigate ourselves. The United States is, NATO is. Those are the people who did the bombing.
Yeah.
And don't worry, Afghanistan also is. But Afghanistan apparently was, the Afghan security force are the ones that wanted the bombing in the first place. So the three people involved in the bombing will investigate themselves. And Dr. Liu says, no. It's not just about this bombing. If you allow this bombing to happen and you do some fake investigations of yourself, well, then there are no laws of war anymore. There are no rules of war, and hospitals aren't protected, and God knows what's going to happen. Now, to give you a sense of the severity of what happened here. Okay, so 22 people died, 12 doctors and nurses, staffers of Doctors Without Borders, 10 patients. They said the patients burned to death in their beds, okay, burned alive. Now, 3 kids died in the bombing. And to me, the most amazing fact of all is the bombing continued for an hour. So Doctors Without Borders calling the U.S. military saying, it's a hospital, stop bombing. It's a hospital, you're killing us, literally, right? And the bombing continued and continued and continued. So as John said, there's shifting reasons behind the attack, and you begin to get a sense of, there's something seriously amiss here.
Yeah.
It wasn't what you want to believe, because you think, wait, we're the good guys. We're not going to do something terrible like this. The other side does terrible things like burning people alive, etc. Our bombs do burn people alive, just in case you're not aware of how bombs work, okay? But it had to be an honest mistake, right? So your first instinct is, they were dropping bombs and there was somebody nearby and they missed. That happens, right?
Maybe.
But it turns out, no, they didn't miss. And there's shifting reasons for it. Give you a sense of that. So.
Yeah, and really fast, I think that there should be the independent investigation, and some feel like if it was conducted, well, then that's simply admitting that they did something wrong. They're admitting that they committed war crimes, and that's not the case. That's what the investigation is intended to find out. And at this point, simply because I haven't been able to come up with a rational explanation for why the U.S. would purposefully bomb a Doctors Without Borders hospital, knowing that the Taliban is not there, knowing that Doctors Without Borders is there, they would know what sort of international impact that would have. And I can't come up with an explanation for why they would choose to do that, especially if, as Doctors Without Borders is saying, there weren't Taliban present in the hospital at the time. And so, but that doesn't mean that I don't think there should be the investigation. But at any rate...
but can I just jump in there for a second? So, look, on the one hand, it seems to make no sense. Why would we do? What do we gain from that, right?
Exactly.
So there are some explanations for that. So some say, look, the Afghan security forces did not like that hospital treats the Taliban injured, okay? The Taliban were not firing from the hospital, but there are Taliban injured in the hospital, as there are other Afghans injured in the hospital. Now, the U.S. has its own medical facility, so there are no U.S. injured there, but Afghans from both sides of the conflict are there. The Afghan security forces don't like that. They're the ones, we believe, based on the fourth explanation, the ones that asked the U.S. Special Forces to call in the airstrike. They didn't call in the airstrike. They asked the Special Forces to call it in, right?
Yeah.
Now, so there is some reason for that. Now, is that a good enough reason? Of course not. That's terrible, and we hope that we didn't listen based on that. Did we know that that's why the Afghan security forces wanted that area bombed? We don't know. That's why you need an investigation, right? And in a lot of these conflicts, you know, whether it's Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Israel and Gaza, us in Yemen, us in Afghanistan, we always say, oh, golly gee, you know, we didn't mean to hit the wedding and the school and the hospital, but we just kind of keep on doing it, right?
Yeah.
And the pharmaceutical plant, if you think that's what it was in Sudan that we hit, et cetera. And there are some who say, well, the idea behind that, and it's hard for us to comprehend because we don't come from this mindset, is there are some in the military who think we teach them a lesson, okay? You teach them a lesson and then they won't do it again. So whether it's the UN sheltering people in a school, right? Or it's the Doctors Without Borders treating Taliban commanders who then come out and kill us afterwards and fight us and, you know, kill our own people. And I want to protect my people, and I don't want that guy being treated. The reason I shot him is because I wanted to kill him. Yeah. Why are they treating him, right? So for us, we go, no. When somebody's wounded, you got to treat him. But not everybody sees it that way.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think the most likely explanation is that it is probably that either the Afghani military had outdated information about when the Taliban had been in there in terms of actually firing from it, and that they had cleared out before the call for the strikes had happened, or that because they're fighting for their own territory, their own city, these sorts of, well, I mean, we got to be super careful to not accidentally kill an international doctor. That might have been less compelling to them, and perhaps this is what you said earlier. It's much easier for us to assume other governments do bad things and ours doesn't. Maybe I'm falling to that. I don't know. But the idea that Obama, who is trying to be so careful in terms of his image, and especially in these sorts of excursions, that they would bomb Doctors Without Borders, it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't see that the gain and the risk, it doesn't balance out. But again, these are the sorts of questions and conversations that should lead to an independent investigation.
All right, one more thing on that. I don't want anybody to get what I'm saying wrong. I don't think President Obama picked the phone up and said, all right, go get Doctors Without Borders. Make sure you drop a bomb.
You're saying he could simply be out of the loop?
No, he's out of the loop. Of course I imagine he's out of the loop for the same exact reason as you. Not because President Obama is not capable of it. He's ordered drone strikes that are signature strikes where he has no idea who he's killing. He's done that many, many times. So it's not out of any loyalty to President Obama or his great intentions that I say this. It's that John is right. He has shown lately a lot of care to make sure we don't hit any civilians.
Yeah.
And that has greatly frustrated the military. And the military and Obama have been clashing over that. So in that context, and in this time period, for him to say, screw it, kill 10 doctors, and that seems improbable, right?
And I'm not at all saying they won't kill civilians if they think there's a chance that they could take out somebody important. I'm saying, and this is actually kind of a sort of cynical look at Barack Obama, he won't kill internationally important, likely to be covered civilians.
Yeah, that's
totally sort of what I'm
true.
saying.
Yes. And then, and finally, the Afghan security forces who seem to have asked for the strike in the first place, just because they're our allies, you think they're the good guys? I mean, we've covered stories about these guys and how they do do the same cultural practices that the Taliban do of kidnapping young boys, raping them, and keeping them as sex slaves. And they do it so thoroughly and repeatedly that our forces continue to have conflicts with them over that issue. They do it on our bases, et cetera. You think those guys are going to say, well, look, man, I know some of my enemies in that hospital that I tried to kill the other day, and I would sorely want to die, but some Western doctors will die. No, that's against my morals.
Yeah, that seems a little bit more likely. Yeah.
Right, but that's why you need an independent investigation, because we don't know, and we need to find out, and I'm not going to trust those same Afghan security forces to tell me what the truth is.
Yeah, now if there is an independent investigation, or before our investigation concludes, we can sort of speculate a little bit based on the information we have whether or not some sort of crime, whether an international crime against international laws of war, or just something, one of our own regulations or laws has been broken. And so why don't we bring up graphic 4? You're going to see here a section of the U.S. Department of Defense's warnings before cessation of protection. And I've highlighted a few important parts. It says, in addition, protection for civilian hospitals may cease only after due warning has been given, naming in all appropriate cases a reasonable time limit, and after such warning has remained heeded. And you can leave that up there for a second. So this is saying that you can attack these places after you give a warning and provide a reasonable time limit for non-combatants to leave the area. Now, conservatives hate this because they think that that's an excuse to let the combatants actually leave the area. But in any event, they do say that there may be cases in which, in the exercise of the right of self-defense, a warning is not due or a reasonable time limit is not appropriate. So if they didn't do a warning, this might be an explanation as to why. But such use of force in self-defense against medical units or facilities must be proportionate. So for instance, if a few people are firing from it, as we say they were, then we cannot simply level the entire building. And when we were saying before that you can't bomb it, but maybe you can move forces in, that's exactly what we're talking about. And this was before seeing the Pentagon's guidelines.
So be clear here. Doctors Without Borders says there was nobody firing from the medical facility at all. Completely, unequivocally, no, did not happen. So yeah, you might want to make that excuse, but that's not the reality. That's what Doctors Without Borders says.
Yeah.
Okay, just so you know.
Yeah.
Now, General John Campbell is the guy leading the effort for the U.S. and NATO in Afghanistan, and he came out and said something very interesting. So that's the next quote here. He said, "We would never intentionally target a protected medical facility." The word "protected" is very important in that sentence. Is it technically protected under the laws of war? I don't know. If somebody was firing in some vicinity, maybe technically it wasn't protected.
Yeah.
So that's telling in both the legal defense that they're setting up and perhaps what they know already happened. So if you think you didn't bomb it, or you think that it was clearly a mistake and you didn't mean to bomb it and you meant to bomb the armory right next door, I don't think you'd start using legalese about protected medical facilities. Yeah. So that gives you some sense of what they think, what General John Campbell and the U.S. military thinks they did.
Yeah, exactly. And so this passage from the Pentagon's guidelines have been going around, and that they've made clear, the U.S. director of the MSF has said that they did not receive any sort of warning like that. And you had mentioned previously that they were calling during the attack, which lasted something like an hour, to say this is our hospital, you're not supposed to be bombing here. In advance of the attack, the GPS coordinates of the hospital had apparently been shared with the U.S. and Afghanistan military, which I didn't even know that they did that, but it's extremely wise that they do. But at the same time, we're hearing some reports that it wasn't necessarily, the planes that were used to bomb the hospital weren't necessarily of the sort that make use of that GPS information. They could be low-flying planes like C-130s or something like that would simply use, they would visually confirm a target, and then perhaps you could have accidents like this. I would say to be extra careful, let's not get involved in these sorts of foreign wars. And then we don't have to worry about all the legalese or the GPS versus eyesight tracking. We just don't have any of these situations. But maybe that's just me being an idealist.
Now, to be clear, if we did not give warning to a medical facility and we bombed it without warning, that is a war crime. So, will there be any consequences to any war crime the U.S. has ever committed? Don't hold your breath.
Yeah.
In the old words of George W. Bush, hadn't happened yet, right? So we'll see, but it's not usually how things shake out. That's why Doctors Without Borders, with some healthy skepticism, whether our investigation of it will be the correct one with the correct results. And even if it was a mistake, think about it. Aren't the generals going to want to cover their own ass?
Yeah.
Of course, even if you put the best positive light on it. And by the way, you can tell that the covering of the asses has already begun because they've already changed their story 4 different times. John Campbell on Saturday, the U.S. military said that it had struck the hospital. They did not know that it had struck the hospital. So they're like, we were taking fire in Kunduz generally. I don't know that we struck a hospital. Then on Sunday, they changed it to, okay, strike did take place, but it was in the vicinity of the hospital. And then on Monday, Campbell came out and said, yeah, okay, fine, it was a hospital. Okay, yeah, there was a strike. It was in the vicinity. It was an actual hospital. But that U.S. force had not been threatened, but that the Afghans requested the strike, right? It makes it sound like the Afghans ordered the strike, which they can't do. And today he came out and clarified, okay, okay, fine. The Afghans asked for it, but it was U.S. Special Forces that said hit this building, and we hit it. Okay, so that's clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and my last thought is it's very easy to obviously say then, well, we can't necessarily trust those Afghani forces, or perhaps they made some sort of mistake. I just finished a final judgment where Vokativ has summarized our spending to train the Afghani military and police and local militias, $65 billion. After $65 billion, you should be able to trust them. And if you can't, don't spend that sort of money in the future.
You know how many times we're going to arm folks, and then, golly gee, it turns out they turned against us, and that money was not well spent. The Mujahideen that turned into Al-Qaeda, Saddam Hussein, who was fighting a proxy war on our behalf against Iran. You know, how did that turn out?
Some of the groups in Syria as well.
And then
at the very least ineffective.
Right. And how much money have we given to Saudi Arabia, and how much have we worked with them for them to turn around and fund Wahhabis throughout the world that then wound up attacking us? And the story goes on. And yet, conventional wisdom in Washington and America is the best answer is intervention and more intervention, despite the fact that history has shown that to be the exact opposite of reality.
Yeah.
But reality and facts are uninteresting things to Washington. How do we make money? How do we keep doing the same things that don't work for public policy but do work for our pocketbooks? That's usually the answer you'll find in Washington.